Agony.
Before we start the tutorial real quick, I just want to give you all a small disclaimer. I know there's a lot of Pyrexwhippa tutorials out there on YouTube that explain basically the basics and the same things, but the tutorial that I'm gonna show you is something that helped me the best from all of these videos, so I can guarantee that the beat that you're gonna be creating gonna definitely make you click dance. Yo, what's up guys, it's Kvrma from No Agony Collective. I'm bringing you a new video on the Collective channel. Today I'm going to show you how to create complex and dope Pyrexwhippa type beats on FL Studio. I will also tell you everything you need to know regarding 808s, heads, a bit of the mixing and the melodies. Starting off with the melody, what I am going to show you first is my main melody that I prepared in here. Yeah, this is just a sample bell sound, which I like to use often on my beats. I would think this is perfectly fitting for Pyrexwhippa type beats because it gives this kind of mysterious sound, which you can hear on most of his beats. In this case, I used the B major to make the melody. I also, for the counter melody, I used the flute, which I will play now real quick. This flute sound gives the whole beat and the whole melody just a darker and more ambient vibe. For the second part of the hook and eventually also the verse, I used a pluck, which I can show you. This pluck you often find on 808 Mafia type beats, or in general songs which are produced by 808 Mafia, especially in the past. For example, Team 88 or Southside used to do a lot of these beats. What I'm going to explain next is the counter melody which I used for the hook. I'll play it real quick. It's basically just the main melody which I put in gross beat and halftime did. Now we'll go over to the 808s. The 808s are kind of a more complicated topic, especially when it comes to Pyrexwhippa type beats, because a lot of people are asking me how to actually make proper Pyrexwhippa type 808s. I always tell them, and I think that's what most of the people already knew, is to take a normal regular spins 808. What I'm doing with it, I'm clicking on this little thing right here and turn up the EQ a bit. Just a bit, not too much. Also, I cut it out a bit, so the 808 gets way more shorter and it fades out a little bit earlier. And then you also have to do the basic stuff, such as cut itself and edit the envelope, turn up the hold and everything else down. Moving on to the 808 pattern. The 808 pattern is kind of more complex, which I could say, especially in Pyrexwhippa type beats. So this is kind of more for more intermediate and advanced producers. What I did basically here is I found out the key that I used. It's B minor, as I already said, and I just made normal pattern, but I kept adding and cutting down these 808s so they hit more and more frequently and just more random. I'll play the pattern real quick. This gives the whole beat a little bit a better bounce, and for example rolls like this, they're pretty good, especially if you play around with the velocity on them. They have that fading in sound and just give the 808 that comes afterwards. Like for example here the E5, it gives the E5 more of a harder hit. Also I would play around a bit with the pan. I panned the 808s, for example the rolls I panned, and some of the 808s, especially the higher notes, I panned them. But don't do it too often, because mainly the 808, they have to be in the central. You can add it here and then, you know, it may catch the ear of the producer or the rapper who you eventually want to hear on your beat. Moving on to the hi-hats. I chose a pretty, let's say, simple hi-hat, a pretty short hi-hat. I got it from the Pyrexwhippa shows the screen kit. If you just search on YouTube Pyrex shows the screen drum kit, you will be able to find a large ass drum kit with this hi-hat sample in there. You can also take a normal head, but make sure it is not too long, because when you do a lot of rolls, it can eventually sound way too busy and it just clashes with each other. So if you take another hi-hat sample, eventually consider playing with the fade out, because this eventually makes the hi-hat way shorter, as you can see. Moving on to the pattern on here, as you can see, I used a lot of rolls and I play with the pitch a bit. Like I used some high-pitched hi-hats, I used some low-pitched hi-hats, especially rolls. For this thing, I would recommend going and using the brush tool, because that way you can just real quickly paint in the rolls and it's not gonna be a big issue for you. I would also consider using 1 second step or 1/3 step. Here I use 1/3 step because of the fact that the rolls are way quicker and faster, but you definitely can play around with it. I also am playing a lot with the velocity, as you can see in here, and also the pan, especially like for example the high-pitched hi-hats. I made them kind of more on the right side of the ear, and I put the low-pitched ones on the left side of the ear. Also on the rolls I made them fade in and fade out a bit, which creates a great bounce. I left some space in here. You can do that here and then to make the whole beat sound kind of more, to give it a better bounce. Now moving forward to the clap or the rim. I mean, it's optional. I use just a regular clap. I wouldn't change a lot here, especially when you're doing a quicker beat. Like I use, for example, the BPM is 150, so I use a clap. If the BPM is like around 130 to 125, Pyrexwhippa himself, and like what I would advise you to is to actually use a rim as a clap. Also, I used pretty easy snare, just a regular one, to just fill the hook, and I left the snare out on the verse. Also, the last thing I did for the arrangement is I used a sub bass or a Reese bass for the bridge. I can even play it. This also makes the bridge not sound too, too empty, and also flows good with the bass, because when there's just the sub bass, it basically fills the whole beat with some sort of bass lines and doesn't leave no space. Another thing that I would consider doing is to build in crashes, especially reversed crashes. This is what I'm doing. I'm just taking a normal crash, I'm playing with the fade in a bit and reversing it, putting it perfectly on the line, so it just guarantees a smooth transition from, let's say, on every 8th bar. Now I will move on to the mixing. The mixing, I kept it pretty simple. I didn't do a lot on it. The only thing that I would also consider doing on the 808 is to put it all on the top, to put a soft clipper on it. On the 808, just leave the soft clipper as it is, then go on the master, create another soft clipper, make sure to put it all to the last slot, and turn the threshold up. This will give the 808 a way more of a bounce, and it will definitely stand out and distort not only the head, but also the open head, which gives this typical Pyrexwhippa type beat vibe. What I also did, I played around with the mono and stereo of the certain sounds, especially when you're doing busy beats like these ones, it's important to give the artist who eventually is gonna buy the beat later or gonna use the beat later, to give them some space to rap on. And by doing this, you just turn this knob right here. You may ask which sounds you will have to put on stereo and which sounds you will have to put on mono. The sounds that you don't use panning on, put them onto mono, and the sounds that you use panning on, put them onto stereo. Because if you put a sound, let's say I put my hi-hat on mono, the panning effect will not be able to be noticed when I put the hat on mono. But when I put it on stereo afterwards, you can hear there's definitely the panning effect going in there. I would also do this with the 808, but all the other sounds that I use, like claps or snares or kicks, I don't put them onto stereo, I just leave them on mono. The sub bass, I put them onto stereo also, and maybe a bit of the melody, but not too much, otherwise the melody will just take over the whole room of the beat. The sound effects, I'm leaving them as they are. I'm not going to go deep into the sound effects. What I'm doing still is to add a parametric EQ on every single sound, because it depends on what drum kit you're using. The sounds might not be 100% clear, so I sometimes just cut out the highs, cut out some of the lows, like on claps, hats. I would leave the 808 as it is. I wouldn't cut out too much of the highs. Maybe move the first knob down, so the 808 afterwards doesn't sound too muddy, especially while it's being so loud. The kick, I would cut some of the highs of the kick also. And yeah, what I would also do is sidechain the kick in the 808, so they don't hit at the same time and it sounds kind of more clear. To do this, you just gotta go to the kick, right click on this little arrow here of the 808 and just click sidechain to this track. After doing this, go over to the 808, get a fruity limiter, go on composition, right click the sidechain, just select the kick, and then you can play around with the threshold a bit, play with the ratio a bit, with the rail and the sustain. The more you turn the threshold down and the ratio up, the longer the space between the kick and the 808 is gonna be. So basically, if I turn the threshold completely down and the ratio completely up, the 808 is gonna hit way later than the kick. Let me just demonstrate that to you. So just go around, play with it a bit, depends on what 808 you're using, but since we're doing the spins 808, just copy these settings that I got right now, and they should do it. Otherwise, what I can still tell y'all is to make sure eventually put a low filter to the bridge. This is what I like to do because it creates a nice vibe and it just gives the listener a kind of an experience when they're listening to the beat. Let me just demonstrate that also. how you do this, you just go to the master channel, activate the 3D law filter, go to the law filter, right click to presets, go to single triangle low pass LFO, and then basically right click on this little green light, click in its song with position and click create automation clip, and then go to the big knob, click create automation clip, and it will give you these two automation clips. What you want to do with this one, you just want to turn it completely up the way, like both sides, and this one is basically now you can control when do you want the effect to end, when do you want the effect to start. Basically you can just create one here, slide it up, and there you have a small effect. That's basically everything with it. Like, if you follow these steps, it will be guaranteed that even Valentine's Camel will dance to this. So yeah, that was it. Stay tuned to more tutorials that are coming soon. We are uploading tutorials on every Tuesday and every Friday to not only remix to like songs that are popping lately, but also some sauce on loops and 808s and in general beat production. Yeah, so make sure to check out No Agony and stay tuned for loop packs and more tutorials soon. If you liked it and if it helped you, please consider subscribing, liking and commenting maybe. Tell us what more tutorials you would want to hear in the future, and I'm gonna play the whole beat right now.